Now each document in the working paper file has a lockdown property. So if we go into the document properties and have a look on the General tab, we'll see that this document does indeed have a lockdown option. Now, if that's true of every single document in the Document Manager, there's likely a better way to see all of these at the same time. So I'm going to click OK. I don't want to have to go through each one. Now, before I do that, I also want to point out in the folder properties, we have additional lockdown options. So just right-click on the tax folder and select Properties. Now, this is my tax folder, and it says an explanation is not required when adding documents after lockdown. Now, I said this previously because I decided that for my tax staff, they're outside of the lockdown requirements. So they may receive the file post-lockdown and still need to be able to do tax work in the file. So for those tax documents that they're adding to the tax folders, I made sure that the tax folders indicated that an explanation is not required when adding documents after lockdown. All other folders outside of my tax folders will have that unchecked. And I don't want my tax folder to be locked down, so I'm going to deselect that. Now, it so happens that when I deselect lockdown at the folder level, that will affect all the documents that are currently in that folder. However, any new documents that I add, I would have to choose whether or not I wanted to lock down those documents. So I'm going to click OK. Now, rather than having to go into the properties of each and every document, as I mentioned, I want to show the lockdown property in the Document Manager. And we can do that through the View menu by selecting Reorder Columns and choosing the Lockdown option. I'm going to move that over to my active columns and click OK. And as you can see, the 4 documents under my tax folder currently do not have a lockdown check mark under the lockdown column. At this point, all of my other documents should, because I haven't gone and changed any of them. The default when creating a new document is to have the lockdown flag selected. Now, it's also worth pointing out at this time that this is a consolidated file. I have multiple entities on the context toolbar. I also have it set up with multiple periods, yearly and quarterly, first, second, third, and fourth quarter. And on top of that, under Tools, Options, Lists, Language, that's where it is. It was under Lists, but it's in the next category. Languages. Under Tools, Options, Languages, I've created 3 languages in my file. So I've got English as my primary language, and I've added French and Spanish. So that's also showing up on my context toolbar as a drop-down, English, French, and Spanish. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about the context toolbar right now, but it will become clearer when we get into the lockdown, and I'll explain that momentarily. I just want to point out, if I change from English to French, I have gone through and translated some of these items, so you see I've got my French descriptions instead of my English descriptions, and that can apply to any of my groupings and any of the document descriptions in the Document Manager. Now I'm going to leave it on English for the time being, and as a result of the context toolbar and these options, when the lockdown is performed, we'll be asked for the lockdown context, which allows the user to specify what context properties they want to use when creating the lockdown milestone, which of course is the snapshot of the document at the point in time of lockdown. So it will use the properties that we specify in the lockdown dialog. And of course, we will see this in the lockdown wizard. So I'm going to leave that for now, and I'll point it out when we get into the wizard once again. Now, we also have the ability to check the status of the engagement within Tracker, specifically the lockdown status. So I'm going to open up Caseware Tracker, and I know many of you probably don't use Tracker, but this is one of the things that Tracker can be very useful for. And I do have a lockdown view here. And in my lockdown view, I've got my client number, operating name, year-end date, the lockdown status, this file is not currently locked down, the lockdown class, I'll talk more about that when we get into the wizard, the lockdown date, and the lockdown jurisdiction. These 4 fields will come from the working paper file. Now, just to be sure, I'll hit the refresh button here, and I've got an extra file in here. That was the template that I think I opened, so I'm going to remove that. There we go. So I'm just going to focus on the operating file, Caseware Zone Lockdown today.